You've just finished watching my video on how to avoid nightmare tenants and how to earn passive income in real estate in Canada, and you're now thinking about becoming a landlord. But what is being a landlord really like? Maybe you're a little afraid that tenants will consume a bunch of your time. Perhaps you imagine costs being higher than revenues. I'm gonna break it down and explain to you what the daily routine of a landlord really entails. The honest truth is being a landlord is not a clear-cut path, but if you're armed with the right knowledge, you will find that being a landlord is not only a very enriching experience, but it is one of the most financially rewarding career choices you can make.
This guy's really got it rough, and he expects me to pay him. Pay him for what? I pick you up in a friggin' jet, I fly over to Fort Lauderdale, you get to drive a big fancy new yacht, he should be paying me.
But done wrong, it can be one of the most heart-wrenching, emotionally draining, and financially burdensome choices that you can make. This is why today I want to tell you what being a landlord is truly like, some of the experiences I've gone through, some of the mistakes I've made, and how to avoid them. So now I'll be going through the 5 challenges that I've gone through as a landlord. 2 of them I've already explained and they're in the videos linked below, but the other 3 I'm going to get to right now. Let's get started. The third challenge is actually preparing the home for rental conditions. So imagine you've purchased your first rental property, you've found an appropriate tenant, and really the second step is preparing the home before you find the tenant. And the best way I like to look at it is imagine yourself living at the property. If you can see yourself living at the property, then you probably don't have to do anything. But if you feel like there's something that needs to be done, something that would annoy you, that's probably a good indication of what you need to do to take care of the property. Leaks are a really big one. Dripping faucets, nobody likes wasting water. If you have any windows without screens, that is actually a health code violation. So get screens in there. It is important that your windows can open. And if you have bedrooms in the basement, you have to make sure that the windows have egress. Egress means a point of exit or entrance. So you need to make sure that in the event there were a fire, the windows are big enough that someone could exit the property. In addition to that, you want to make sure you have working smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors, and overall, you want the condition of the property to be clean so that someone can come in and say, this landlord is a respectable landlord. They've given me a clean, good property in a good state of wear, tear, and repair. And more importantly, by having a property that is well maintained, clean, efficient, you're going to attract someone who is interested in those qualities. If you have the opposite of that, you may attract someone you don't actually want. So steps 1, 2, and 3, finding a property, we got that linked in a video below. Avoiding nightmare tenants is actually step number 3, but preparing the home, step number 2. Avoiding nightmare tenants, step number 3, also in a video below. Now I'm gonna get to step number 4. Okay, step number 4 is dealing with the small hassles that might come up while you own the property and it is tenanted. So for example, a tenant could call you and say, hey, Mr. So-and-so, Mrs. So-and-so, I'm having a leak and I need you to fix it. If it is an emergency, you do have to actually be on call at all times as a landlord, and someone will likely call you and say, hey, Mr. So-and-so, Mrs. So-and-so, my place is flooding, I don't know what to do. You have to get a service provider out there right away. If it's a non-emergency, you can get a service provider out there at a later time, but it does need to be dealt with in a reasonable expected time. Now, another thing of note is that when dealing with these small, what we call hassles, you have to be having a good relationship with service providers. So usually,
Boring.
Challenge 5 that I've had to deal with. Challenge 5 is dealing with your regular ongoing maintenance. And so that's something that you've got to regularly deal with regardless of someone complaining. So for example, every year you should probably getting the furnace cleaned, assuming you have a furnace, and serviced. You should make sure that if it's a house, you have the gutters cleaned. You should make sure that the lawn is getting mowed on a regular basis, assuming that you are the one who is responsible for that. The snow is being shoveled, the windows are being washed. All that sort of stuff is in the realm of regular maintenance, and it's something that you need to be doing on an annual basis. Otherwise, you end up in a situation where you have what's known as deferred maintenance. Deferred maintenance is regular maintenance that was added up over time, and now instead of it becoming a small issue that you could have dealt with along the way, it's now turned into a big issue. You forgot to clean the eaves troughs for the last 5 years, and now there's trees growing out of your eaves troughs, and water is leaking over the eaves every time it rains. So remember, a stitch in time saves 9. Regular maintenance is very important. There are a bunch of schedules online that you can find of regular home property maintenance that you should adhere to. That was the 5 challenges. Now I'm going to give you some tips and tricks. Despite all the challenges, real estate is still, as a small real estate investor, a great opportunity to make some money. And it's important to remember that with good planning and preparation, you can have a profitable journey in real estate. And so the first tip I'm going to give you is buy something where your tenants are not someone that you just rent out to randomly, but perhaps you're renting to a roommate. Perhaps you are sharing a space with an individual, and that way you can understand the nuances of perhaps what the demands are of a tenant. You can very closely watch what requires maintenance, and from there you can grow and learn. And then the next step would be to rent it out as an entity to someone else where you're not living in the space. But by living in the space originally and initially as your first investment, perhaps that will be the best way to learn what actually needs to be done on a regular basis. Okay, second tip is keep things basic initially until you learn the game. So instead of renting out a high-end luxury furnished rental where the tenant might be a little more demanding, rent something based on the opportunity of a tenant to rent because of a certain location and affordability. So student housing is the best example. That was one of my first investments. It's actually a property where I lived in, I rented to 3 other roommates, and you know, the demands of those tenants aren't as high as the demands of some of the properties I have now, where you know, any little thing goes wrong and I'm getting a call, a text, an email, and of course you just have to maintain a higher standard to avoid all of that. But initially, again, when you're learning, it's important to start slow and build up. Okay, last tip that I'm going to give you is hire a professional property manager. Now, what does a professional property manager cost? It can range tremendously from 5% all the way to 25% of the gross annual rent. Some managers charge a placement fee for the tenant in the amount of 1 to 2 months rent, maybe even half a month if you're lucky, and then management is on top of that. However, there is a value to a professional manager. A professional manager will qualify the tenants for you, making sure that you're not going to end up with a tenant that is not suitable, or the professional tenant who goes from place to place to place, conning landlords out of thousands of dollars. They will make sure that the maintenance of the property is taken care of in a timely fashion. They will make sure that those hassles that you have to deal with are dealt with, and they have people on call 24/7. It does cost something to hire a professional manager, but it can be worth the cost if you want a more hands-free armchair type investment. Well, there you have it, guys. I hope you learned from some of the challenge I've faced along the way, as well as some of the tips. If you do have any questions or want to know more about the challenges I've faced, or you'd like some other tips, comment below. Otherwise, please like, subscribe. Love you. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.